Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ryan Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you doing today? Happy New Year for those of you that are joining me fresh on this video. It's brand new year 2026. I hope you read the terms and conditions first before you agree to it. Anyway, today's video, I wanted to talk about something that's really cool out there that a lot of people have asked me about. Didn't have too much knowledge on it, so I had to do some research, and there's already a second revision of this ride, so let's talk about Falcons Fury over at Busch Gardens and Ikaros over at Gröna Lund. I'm probably saying that wrong.
Now get ready. Here we go.
Alright, today's video we are talking about the INTAMIN Sky Jump. That's an interesting phrase, but the INTAMIN Sky Jump is basically Falcons Fury and Ikaros over at Grota Lund. Basically, they are two rides where you go up, they're drop towers, you go up to the top, and as you get to the top, they twist the rider to where the rider is face down. This is a feeling that you would get while skydiving, probably one of the reasons why it's called a sky jump, right? They're very unique rides. INTAMIN's only done 2 of these so far, Busch Gardens being the first one back in 2014. A 32 passenger ride. It mimics one of their gyro drops or something where they used the tried and true method of they used a singular round tower and built a circular gondola around the outside, much like their gyro drop. But the difference is that this thing is much bigger in scale and way more complex. How complex is it? Well, it's complex enough to where when they were asked to do a second one, INTAMIN scaled down everything and said basically that 32 passenger model, way too much work, way too much effort. They didn't want to do it again. I'm sure if you go ask for one, they will absolutely build it for you. The newer version, Ikaros, fixed a bunch of the problems that they had over there at Busch Gardens, Tampa with the original Sky Jump model. Alright, so while I was doing my research for this video, I was looking around and at first I wanted to do a video just on Falcons Fury over there at Busch Gardens. And then somebody said to me, hey, check this ride out over there at Gröna Lund. Again, I'm probably saying that wrong. I'm going to butcher some names. I apologize for that. Anyways, over there at Grota Lund, INTAMIN installed their second revision of this sky jump over there. It's called Ikaros. So that was really interesting because I was expecting to see Falcons Fury just done slightly different, but I expected the basic nuts and bolts to be the same. And INTAMIN went a completely different direction with the thing. It looked more like a traveling ride. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. But then I started looking into the 2 of them, and I'm like, Falcons Fury was the revision 1, and I really believe INTAMIN learned from a lot of the mistakes they made when they built that. They tried to copy their gyro drop and put that into Falcons Fury, and a lot of that stuff just didn't work. By that, I mean it ended up making the structure and system way more complicated than it needed to be. So for the purpose of digesting the ride, so I can describe how it works and go through some of the mechanics of it, it was actually way easier, I'm talking way easier, to actually look at Revision 2. Because Revision 2, the Ikaros ride, they fixed a bunch of stuff, and you'll see they got rid of a ton of stuff on there that they didn't need from the original Sky Jump model. And that was really interesting. So there is a lot of things on Falcons Fury that I just don't go into a lot of. So realistically, this video is mainly going to be focused on their Sky Jump Revision 2 or the Ikaros ride, because that is really the better model to look at. And then once you understand that Revision 2, you could see pretty much everything applies to Revision 1, but there's a lot more little parts and pieces involved. It's kind of like Revision 1, they put a pivot arm with a socket on it and an extra shock and a sensor on it and all these components onto, and they got rid of all that in Revision 2. It was just a pin pivot with a bearing. That was it. Revision 1, they lifted the entire gondola up with 8 lifting cables using 4 AC motors on top. Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot of stuff going on. So when you talk about the Revision 1 and you talk about dropping a ring down a tower, it sounds really easy to do. But a ring falling straight is a lot harder to do than you think it is because of the weight. If you get people sitting to one side of the gondola or the other, then the weight, it tries to go crooked, and then it doesn't want to fall straight, and it could end up bind, or even worse, it could end up chattering. That's basically, if you've seen my video on hunting that roller coasters do, where they kind of really fast go left to right down the tracks, that video on hunting is basically a drop tower vertically when the tolerances are too wide. It'll basically, lack of better terms, it'll basically hunt or chatter as it goes down the tower. Scrubs off all sorts of speed, but the big problem is it introduces stress into the entire frame, which could cause cracking. So for those type of rides like they built with Falcons Fury, if you hear me pause on this a lot, I'm sorry, but I keep wanting to say Falcons Flight, and I'm trying hard not to say it. So Falcons Fury, when it falls down, they had to put a lot of wheels on there, much like any other rotating ride, to keep the thing falling straight down. Intamin's original drop towers used just a series of slides on the back to a metal rail, no wheels. But these drop rides, where they're circular in nature, they use wheels down the side of the thing to guide it all the way down. The wheels also really helps compensate for loads that are uneven to keep the structure straight up and down as it slides over it. Those things I just talked about are the big differences. They used cables to lift it, 8 motors up on top, which is a lot, 36 passengers, and they basically just overcomplicated the mechanisms down that take the arms and move you, the rider, back up into the flying position or the sitting position. That's pretty much it. So if we go to Ikaros, you'll see that the system's pretty much been gutted and there's nothing left of it. It simplified it so much better. So one of the biggest things that you'll see is that there's only 2 sides to Ikaros. It doesn't run a 360-degree gondola. So what's the advantage of that? Well, each gondola only seats 8 people across. So at the most, you could only do 16. But the fact that they divided the ride into 2 means you have the ability to dispatch it at 2 different intervals. That means when people are taking a long time to load on one side, you could still dispatch the other side, and it will work just fine. They've essentially separated the tower. Great. What does that do? That makes your load time quicker. What else does that do? That speeds up dispatches, so your throughput can start going faster and faster and faster. Now, is it going to get to the 32-seat model at optimum operation? Probably not. But where you will excel is that in that 32-seat model, they had a lot of mechanics to maintain on the inside of the gondola right there at the base. So when it was sitting down, you had to keep the whole thing level and straight. And then as the catch car came down and latched on, it had to latch on 4 different sides, has to release onto 4 different sides. It has to lift from 4 different sides. There is a lot of mechanism there. Another thing they figured out was up on top, when they got the seats from the sitting position into the dive position, or the fly position, whatever you want to call it. Those seats, they were able to do that much higher towards the top with the new model, because they figured out that the other one just gave it all sorts of problems when they tried to energize that thing. So there's some big differences there. Everything that they did, it seems like a step backwards on revision 2, but everything they actually did was a step forward in keeping the ride up and running. When you take some of that complexity out of rides, they tend to work a lot better. There's less things to go wrong, less things to monitor, so they're simpler, which means your downtime goes down, and when you take your downtime down, you get your throughput up closer towards a theoretical number that the parks actually purchase these rides under. Alright, so let's start at the bottom with Ikaros and just talk about it, because again, a lot of these principles transfer over. Instead of Falcons Fury having a round cylindrical tube as its structure for the inside, Ikaros featured to use a square structure, kind of like an SNS tower, with lattice going up on all corners. This made the structure really open, accessible. You could put ladders on the side of it. It doesn't take up much of the skyline because skyline things with lattice work, it kind of becomes transparent. And then you can get to things a lot easier. You don't have to have somebody on the inside trying to figure out where something is on the outside when it comes to track anchoring or anything else like that. So it's very accessible. Up the tower on both sides are two large diameter rails. The rails that run up both sides are what the gondola actually goes up and down on. Unlike Falcon's Fury, which used a guidance system on all four sides to basically keep the gondola centered and straight as it was lifting up, Ikaros basically only needs two rails. It's kind of like a roller coaster. It's got outer roads, inner roads, and then a set of guide wheels right in the center. Top and bottom, very minimal setup, very forgiving. There's not much adjustment needed on these as well because there's hardly any gap that changes and not much wear to them either. On top of Ikaros, there are two very large motors up on top. Since they used AC, they used 4 AC motors on Falcon's Fury. I'm guessing, because I don't know on this one, I'm guessing they stuck with the AC motors up on top, but they only used 2 for Ikaros because Ikaros only has 2 sides. So there's only 2 needed. Now, on Falcon's Fury, they chose cables to lift the gondola up. Now, cables and INTAMIN go way back. INTAMIN uses cables for everything on all their rides. Not uncommon. They have a lot of experience with it. They have a lot of engineering with it. They know how to do cables, especially on drop towers. They know how to run cables. Falcon's Fury, same thing. They go up from the gondola. They go up towards the top and around over on the side into the inside and then counterweight back down to the bottom. This is the exact same principle that they use on their smaller drop rides as well and their giant gyros as well. So cables are very standard on INTAMIN rides, but for Ikaros, they went an entirely different direction. Where Falcon's Fury, they used 4, I believe it was 8 cables all the way around the ride. And there, if you look at Falcon's Fury, they're basically on the side of there's these troughs that stick out that have little slits in them. You can't see much through them, but on the inside of those troughs, that is where the cable is. The trough is actually to contain the cable, just like on the side of a launch ride, like it used to be King Ka, it used to be Top Thrill, Accelerator, and other style accelerator rides out there still use cables. They're in the side underneath where you can't see them because if a cable explodes or breaks apart, they want it to stay inside of that trough as much as possible and not come out to where the people are. So that was the cable end of it. For Ikaros, though, they actually used roller chain on the inside, which was very interesting. It took a while to figure this out. I had to look through a lot of different videos because I was like, what are they using to lift that? Because the trough down the center looked like the original INTAMIN Freefall, which wasn't actually designed by INTAMIN. That was designed by Gröna, if I'm remembering that right. Where INTAMIN or Gröna used 2 chains with a small lifting lug in the center to bring the coaches up to the top of the ride and then push them out, that whole thing. So I'm looking at Ikaros, and INTAMIN's actually using a roller chain in the middle of it. So you can see the chain pretty much in the middle of it, and then to the outside, that's where the wheels are on those things. There's a reason for using a roller chain, which is really cool. So the roller chain comes down and it connects to the pickup, which is basically a long sled in the center. I don't have any pictures of it. I don't have anything up close from it. I apologize for that. Very hard to get pictures of these things. Anybody that knows my videos knows these things are not easy to get pictures of to where people can actually see what's going on the inside. But basically it's a long bar sled with a couple of wheels on it, and then it has a lifting attachment that hangs off the side. That attaches to the roller chain up on top, which goes all the way up to the top of the ride and then up and over a bull wheel on the top. And then the tail of that chain actually goes to the other side and actually goes into the lifting trough. It's not the lifting trough. The 2 troughs are right next to each other. You have the lifting trough and then essentially a return trough right behind it. So on one side, the lifting trough, that's what's actually lifting the gondola up. And on the other side, it has a return trough. So the chain actually goes up and over the top of it and then comes back down the other side. Now, I was able to find videos of people that were using cameras to record themselves, and in the background you could see as they're lifting up, in the background on the other trough, the opposite trough, you could see where the chain suddenly passes them on the way up. So as they're coming up, the chain passes itself as it's going back down the other side. Now, I was like, that's interesting because that is a lot of weight on one side just to lift up. Because when that motor originally starts the lift of the entire cab, that cab, gondola, whatever you want to call it, plus the chain going all the way up high, you would go a couple 100 feet up there, that's a lot of weight to lift. But the interesting thing is that it's also dragging against the brakes. So I'm sure the motors through a planetary drive are oversized to handle this weight. But the nice part is that the higher up it goes, the more of that tail goes onto the other side. And as it lifts up, the tail basically creates a counterweight. So like a lot of lifting scenarios, instead of it just being a constant current and lift up on one side where you're lifting the load the entire way, it's the heaviest as it drags it through the brakes, and then once it starts to get out of the brakes, the tail also starts becoming longer, which helps to counterweight on the other side and help lift the other side up, reducing the stress on the motor and gearbox. So once it gets all the way up to the top, there's some magic that happens up there. It's really interesting stuff. So I'm going to put a break in the video right there, and I'm going to say, let's go back down and talk about the gondola where you sit, or the cab where you sit. Basically 8 passengers across. They use a standard over-the-shoulder restraint vest style, so it's very nice and comfortable, with an adjustable strap on the seat. Very critical for these rides that do stuff like tilt you out of position. The manufacturers want that added little, like, just in case, so they put the buckle on there and then have the operators tighten it down. Now, the restraint is a very standard style. There is nothing new and exciting going on there. It uses 2 gas cylinders in the back, just like most rides do, and it holds the restraint shut. It's monitored in the lock position to make sure it doesn't come open, and then they can release it down on the ground because the gondola is going to sit on a set of unlock pegs, basically, that transmit the power from the structure back into the cab. Once the cab leaves those little pegs or studs, it can't get an unlock signal from there, so it's just going to be in that position indefinitely. Now, the seating areas are built very similar to Falcons Fury. They still pivot off towards the back, and in the center of the cab, they have a large arm that comes up with a magnetic brake. The magnetic brake is needed for stabilizing the structure once it falls. Towards the back of the gondola, it's all pretty much the same stuff. You have a squarish frame that sits up against a tower, and it's got 2 rows of magnets going vertically. Those are the ones that slow the ride back down once it falls from the top back down to the bottom. So what's different on the gondola from most rides is that this gondola, you can go from the sitting position to the flying position or jump position, whatever you want to call it. Because of that, how does it get there? It's got these pneumatic cylinders, 2 of them, that will take your seat from the sitting position back to the jump position. Those 2 cylinders are pneumatic. They require air pressure to pull you back up. Where does it get that air pressure? Gets it from the top. So let's go back up to the top. As you're going up towards the top of the ride, but basically as it goes up, it connects with a movable air arm. The air arm basically just waits for the gondola to come up, and then as soon as the gondola hits it, it opens the valve up and starts to flood the gondola with air. So this arm is under tension, so it's not just like sitting there with gravity, it's actually has tension forcing it down. And the reason for that is when the gondola comes up and hits it, it has to create a seal for air pressure to go in. Now you're going to need a handful of pressure to get in there. The exact pressure of which I am not sure, but I'm going to imagine it's somewhere in the 60 to 70 psi area, which is a lot to contain for that. Now, if we look at the lifting coach on Falcons Fury, we'll see that there's actually pneumatic tanks inside the lifting coach. So on Falcons Fury, I'm pretty sure it fills its tanks at the bottom of the ride and then lifts to the top and then does the same thing, injects the air up at the top of the ride when the lifting cab is instructed to do so. So when the gondola comes up, it basically impacts that air delivery assembly and then opens the valve, essentially, kind of like a tire Schrader valve, just pushes on it and opens the valve up and allows air pressure to start flooding into the gondola. When the pressure goes into that gondola, it branches out and it goes to both of those lifting cylinders. As the cylinders pressurize, they basically retract and come back up. This is the same thing they do at Falcons Fury. The difference is that they do it for all those rows of seats all the way around, so a much bigger air delivery system is needed. Now, these things are on little tracks up there, so they simply go up and come back down, but that's also where the air compressor is, so there's more componentry up on top of the ride. So now you have 2 drive motors and an air compressor up there, along with a handful of all sorts of sensors, contactors, and everything else that has to live up there to feed those motors. So now the seats have now turned from the sitting position to the jump position, and the gondola continues to lift up, 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 up. Now this is where on a lot of Intamin's drop rides, they have to bring it into a parked position and let it sit there before they manually unlock it. Now, Ikaros is no different from that, honestly. It pulls it right up to there and gets it into that park position, and it holds it there for a couple seconds. Now, I'm imagining that is to make sure that the tilt has gone fully the way it's supposed to, that I can see on there is nothing monitoring the tilt. So, if you wanted to say we want to make sure the tilt, or going from the seating to the dive position or the jump position, is in its proper place, what I would do is I would say, well, it takes 60 psi to make sure the gondola goes from its seating to jump. It's like, okay, so as I am delivering pressure from my air compressor, I'm going to watch my storage tank right there that's outside of the ride. When that storage tank connects, I'm going to see the pressure drop way down because the flow has started delivering pressure into the gondola. As the flow slows down, my pressure will start to come back up. And then I'm going to say, once I have reached 60 psi in there, that means the cylinders are retracted as far up as they can go and they have stopped moving. Once they've stopped moving, I say, okay, I'm fully in that retracted position. At that point, I want to make sure my motors, safe off, torque, and all the other stuff and chain movement has stopped completely. And then I'm going to say, okay, go ahead and release it. Now, the release is something on the ride. When you look at the catch car, looks like a big vertical bar that sits in the trough. When you look at the catch car, it just has a arm sticking out like this. Very simple little device. It just sticks out underneath there and grabs underneath the gondola. Now, that little device that sticks out there is probably just shaped more like an L, or like a long L or something like that, so that when it sticks out and I get into position, I can simply use an arm and push on this and it will retract back in and then unlock. Now, the reason why they do a lot of stuff like that and they don't use an actuator or anything else is because when you make an arm that does this, you can curve it in both directions to make sure that if the gondola passed above it or below it, or it came out while it was open for some reason, that it would simply just be a smooth operation and it would just unlock. For some reason, if the gondola came up and the release arm was extended inside of the tower, it would just come up and basically release the arm and the gondola would drop. You honestly wouldn't really know anything about it. It's the same exact thing as if you got up there and it did not tilt for you, like there was an air leak. We've seen this before all the time on Falcons Fury over at Busch Gardens. It will go up. I've seen videos where it started to tilt, it went like half, 3/4 of the way, and then just kind of sagged back down. Well, the ride aired out, obviously, so the cab was up in place. There was nothing else to do, so they just manually release it, which is still pneumatic components just going, okay, click, open, here it goes, and it drops the cab back down. Rare thing, but it does happen. You want to make sure things don't get in the way if something happens out of position. The worst case scenario is you design something without a curve on it that's supposed to engage with something else, and you get a blunt end impacting on it, and then it would start bending steel, basically. Not good at all for your componentry. So basically we extend our little arm out, which pushes the lock back in, and the cab falls. As it falls, it instantly detaches from its air. Now, this is a question I got a lot of, and it's kind of tricky to answer. Falcon's Fury, when it releases, it makes a whistling sound, like a high whistle as it drops down. What they had to do is deliver that air into Falcon's Fury at 1 or 2 locations to feed a whole bunch of different arms. So when you uncouple an air hose, the hose that's not guarded, which would be typically the male end of the hose, when you uncouple it, that hose bleeds out all the air pressure all of a sudden. It goes psh, all of a sudden. So it's like, okay, so that's what they're doing. When they uncouple the gondola from the lifting device, that air bleeds back out. Now, on the Revision 2, the Ikaros system, since you only have one gondola with 8 seats and 2 cylinders and that's it, the air bleed for that is almost instantaneously. As soon as it lets go, just go like that, and then the cylinders are open to atmosphere. There's not much to it. But when you're talking about joining a whole bunch of them together all the way around, as in the Falcon's Fury, when you open up that connection, now it is a big connection that is suddenly open to all of those cylinders. And those cylinders are about 8 feet long. That's a long cylinder. So all that cylinder, 8 feet long, now has to evacuate itself back out into the connections with all the other cylinders and back out the top. I'm pretty sure that's the reason why Falcon's Fury makes that sound, because that's all you're hearing is the sound of compressed air leaving a fitting as the ride drops. There's just a lot going on. It clicks, it unlocks, you hear a lot of people screaming, and you hear that noise in the background, so it's really shrouded. You can't hear it that well, plus it's 300 feet away. If you were closer to it, and it suddenly opened with no one on it, you might be able to hear it closer, just sound like a as it dropped. It's like, oh, that's air leaving the system. One of the big questions is, how come when it drops, you're lying down in the jump position? How come, man, turned into William Shatner there for a second. How come you're lying in the jump position? And sorry, anyways, how come it doesn't just right itself instantly as you go back down? Well, that air pressure that you had to relieve takes just a second of time to actually relieve itself all the way. There's check valves and stuff inside there to make sure they're like one-way air checks to make sure that once the pressure goes away, the cylinders can easily right themselves again. But realistically, the difference is that as you drop, nothing has changed state. You held in this position, you have dropped at the same rate as gravity now with the rest of the cab. So there's actually nothing to right you, because gravity is the thing that will right you from that jump position to the seating position. So as long as you are falling with gravity, you will be in that jump position. Now, as you go down, you start to hit the trim brakes, not the main arresting brakes, but the trim brake. What's the difference between the trim brake and the main arresting brake on these fall rides? It's really simple. You look up the tower and you'll see that there's 2 sets of brake fins. This is more so on the original Falcon's Fury than it is on Ikaros. All right, the 2 sets of brake fins are staggered. One is really tall and it goes halfway up the structure. That is your trim. The other one starts down lower. When you put the 2 together, that is your main reduction brakes towards the bottom. Falcon's Fury has those brakes going way up high a tower. They're like 2/3 up the tower. And that is to slowly start decelerating the gondola, so your body, everything starts pushing against gravity, and it allows that system to go from the jump position to the sitting position gently. Now, Ikaros uses a similar system, but the brake fins are staggered going down, which meaning it allows the gondola to fall at a faster rate of speed all the way down towards the bottom until the primary brakes engage, making your drop essentially longer and more fearful, essentially, because you're still falling face first towards the ground. Now, if you watch POV videos and stuff like that, off-ride videos, on Ikaros, man, when people get to the bottom, they are still swinging back and forth a little bit, right, when they get down towards the bottom. Falcons Fury, not the case. They have stopped swinging when they're still 60, 70 feet up in the air, and they're just coming back down towards the bottom. Falcons Fury is your safer bet towards it too. It's gentler. It's easier for the rider and everything else. It's like, that's the easy one. Ikaros is like, yeah, we figured out how to scare you more. So go on Ikaros over here. That's the cool one. All right, so now the part of the gondola, it looks like a big arm that's sitting there. It's going out, and it's got that horseshoe-looking U on top of it. A lot of people know what this is. That's a magnetic brake or an eddy current brake. That eddy current brake, that's the magnetic yoke attached to the arm. I'm not yoking about this. When the arm goes from the jump position to the seating position, that arm on top, basically right here, suddenly swings backwards. As it swings backwards, that magnetic yoke basically hits an eddy current brake fin as it goes backwards. It does two things. One, it slows your descent and makes the riding from the jump position to the sitting position much easier. But then at the same time, it also keeps you from swaying back and forth a lot. Now, this is one thing on Falcons Fury. They kind of went overboard on this because they not only have the brake on there, but Falcon Fury has a couple little extra bracket-looking pivoting pieces with shocks and stuff on them to also assist that from not swinging back and forth. On the Revision 1, it looked like INTAMIN was really concerned about how much you would swing back and forth once you were done. I forgot to state the obvious. There are no magnetic brakes on Ikaros on the arms themselves that slow the gondola from swinging back out. That was just the Revision 1. Revision 2, they got rid of them. Probably choked the air cylinder to help. The shocks are set up in such a way to where the shock in the loaded position, I should say the air cylinder in the loaded position, does not bottom out. So that's not all the way extended when you get on the ride. When you get on the ride, it still has another couple of feet of extension. So because of that, you're actually able to go past that load position, swing out just a little bit more, and it doesn't tear up your air cylinder at all. Because if you hit that and it bottomed out and the air cylinder bottomed out, you would pull the air cylinder in half. Definitely break the thing. There would be all sorts of bad noises coming from it and parts and pieces falling off the ride. Not good. I can also assure you there's a stop on both sides to make sure the cab physically stops from swinging before you actually bottom out the air cylinder on there. That's just a common thing the way systems are designed. So you'll see if you put the two pictures of the gondolas, like side profile especially, side by side with each other, you can see parts and pieces missing off of Ikaros that are there on Falcons Fury. Again, that's the stuff that INTAMIN said, you know what? Turns out we didn't need that. And manufacturers do that all the time. Difference between Revision 0, Revision 1, Revision 2. Manufacturers take stuff off of rides all the time that were complex, hard to maintain. There was a lot of stuff behind them. And it's just like, you know, once it was all said and done and the ride was up and running and they had literal data in their hands to back it up, they just kind of went, oh, you know what? We didn't need that. Now, are they going to go back to the Revision 1 and say, hey, look, turns out we didn't need that. Let's take yours all the way apart? They're like, nope, because that's how Revision 1 was designed. They're not going to change Revision 1. They're only going to move forward with Revision 2. Now, at some point in time, if Busch Gardens went back and said, hey, you know what, we don't like these pivot pieces and all these shocks and everything else on there, they could get INTAMIN to go back in and basically redesign Revision 1 into close to what more like Revision number 2 is. But are they going to do that? Probably not. The amount of money that's going to cost to redesign that whole thing is probably going to rival the cost of the ride. So they're probably not going to go back in and have them redo that. Honestly, they would probably just replace the ride. Heck, I bet you they could probably put in 2 of those towers right next to each other and have them operate just fine, and that's going to be the exact same throughput capacity as the one that they have in there right now. Less complexity in everything. That's pretty cool. Last thing I forgot to cover, the catch wagon where it picks up the cab down at the bottom. There is another component to that. You can actually see it on the release. When the two release up on top, you can see that the release mechanism pulls back into the tower side. And at the same time, there's a piece on the gondola that unlocks and moves as well. Two pieces, two different actions open up. It's really interesting, and I can't find footage of this. I've looked, maybe during the editing I could find more of it. But I can't find footage of this, but it's really interesting what it looks like to me, just from the slim milliseconds of video there is on it that actually came from Intamin's website. It looks like it's in its full down / load position sitting there. Basically, there's an arm behind the gondola that is extending the unlock mechanism or the lifting mechanism out behind the gondola. And that mechanism is extended out as long as the seats are down. So it's sitting out and down. That way when the catch wagon comes down, it can go right underneath there and then go lock back in, and then it can lift up. The way it looks to me, and if somebody's been there, can see this, let me know. The way it looks to me is that if for some reason your gondola was not in the seated position, it was kind of stuck halfway between seated and jump position for some reason. Don't know how that would happen, but mechanical, something messed up. Basically, that catch wagon would come down, and even if it was told to go again, the catch on the back side of the gondola would not be there. So it would be retracted, essentially. So the catch wagon would come back down and then just go right back up. Wouldn't be able to grab a hold of it. It's not until the seating is in the full down position that catch slides forward and it can actually be picked up. Now, it looks like something, the way they have it cammed in there, like the release arms basically kind of look like they form a triangle. So it looks like something that once it's lifted up in that position, you can take the cab and run it from the seating to the jump position fully, and it won't affect that mechanism at all. Basically, as soon as it releases, that mechanism retracts. Down on the ground, as soon as it's down, it pushes that mechanism back out. Once you're in the seated position, lift up, go into the jump position, and then once you release here, that other side releases as well. Kind of two systems letting go of each other at the same time. That way one can't accidentally grab the tower, can't accidentally grab the gondola can't accidentally grab the tower. They took both of them away at the same time and just let the thing drop down in there. So when I did this video, when I started looking into it, I was really like, okay, one day I'm going to do the Falcons Fury, and then someone came up and said, hey, check out Ikaros, it's really cool. And I just started making notes on it. I was like, oh yeah, oh, here's how the release system unlocks, and then I was like, wow, Ikaros is really superior to Falcons Fury. It was quite amazing. As I kept making more and more notes, I just got more and more fascinated, and I was just like, okay, so I know what this week's video is going to be. If you liked it, please like, subscribe, share, do all that stuff downstairs. It does help me out. I do appreciate it. And as always, stay off the air gates.